I dare you, double, triple dog dare you.
Max shouted, his voice echoing in the stillness of the twilight. His eyes gleamed with mischief.
No way, you know what they say about that place.
His friends, Emily, Jake, and little Lily, exchanged nervous glances. The old Whitaker house loomed before them, its silhouette a jagged scar against the dying sun. It was the stuff of local legends, whispered about in hushed tones. Jake mumbled, his gaze darting towards the overgrown path leading to the house. Whitaker House stood alone, perched atop the highest hill overlooking their town. It had been empty for as long as anyone could remember. The stories about it were endless. Some said it was haunted by a family who died within its walls. Others claimed it was cursed. But Max, ever the daredevil, was unfazed. He puffed out his chest, his shadow stretching long and thin in the fading light.
Scared?
He taunted, nudging Jake playfully.
Maybe we shouldn't, Max. It's getting late, and it's creepy even from here.
Emily, her brow furrowed with concern, stepped forward, her voice barely a whisper. The old wooden door creaked open with a groan, as if disturbed after a long slumber. The sound echoed through the empty halls, a haunting reminder of the life that once filled this place. A musty smell wafted out, thick with the scent of decay and forgotten things. The air was dense, almost tangible, carrying with it the stories of years gone by, of laughter and sorrow now buried under layers of dust. Inside, the house was dark and silent, the air heavy with dust. Each step stirred up tiny particles, dancing in the faint beams of light that managed to penetrate the gloom. The silence was almost deafening, broken only by the occasional creak of the old wooden floorboards. Cobwebs draped the furniture like ghostly shrouds, and the only light came from slivers of the setting sun piercing through cracks in the boarded-up windows. The rays of light created an eerie, almost magical atmosphere, casting long shadows that seemed to move and shift with every step. They moved cautiously through the house, their footsteps echoing in the silence. Each creak and groan of the old mansion seemed to whisper secrets of the past, urging them to tread carefully. The children, with wide eyes and bated breath, felt the weight of history pressing down on them. In the attic, amidst piles of discarded furniture and cobweb toys, they found it. A dollhouse. It was an unexpected discovery, a relic from a bygone era standing out amidst the decay. The attic, with its clutter and shadows, seemed to hold its breath as they approached the tiny house. It sat on a dusty table, its tiny windows glowing faintly in the dim light. The dollhouse, though small, seemed to have a presence of its own, as if it were waiting for someone to find it. The children couldn't help but feel a mix of curiosity and unease, wondering what stories this miniature house held within its walls. Lily, drawn to its intricate details, reached out and touched its cold porcelain roof. As she did, a chill ran down her spine, and she felt a prickling sensation on the back of her neck. A soft whisper seemed to emanate from the dollhouse, a barely audible murmur that sent shivers down their spines. They huddled closer, their eyes wide with fear.
Did you hear that?
Emily whispered, her voice trembling.
It's probably just the wind.
Max said, though his voice lacked its usual confidence, but even he couldn't ignore the growing sense of unease that had settled over them.
There's someone in the dollhouse, he cried, pointing a trembling finger. I gasped, stumbling backward in horror. It was a young girl, her eyes wide and filled with a chilling sadness. He leaned closer, his heart pounding in his chest. He was staring at the dollhouse, its tiny rooms illuminated by the last rays of the setting sun. They were faint, yet distinct, as if the house itself were trying to speak. The whispers grew louder, swirling around us like a malevolent wind. The dollhouse glowed with an eerie light, casting long, distorted shadows on the attic walls. The light seemed to pulse, almost as if it were alive, breathing in the darkness. Each flicker of the light sent shivers down their spines, making the shadows dance menacingly around them. The temperature plummeted and the air grew thick with the smell of damp earth and decay. It was as if the very essence of the attic was trying to suffocate them, wrapping them in a cold, clammy embrace. The walls, covered in mold and grime, seemed to close in, making the space feel even more confined. The whispers grew louder, swirling around them, mocking their fear. They were trapped. The voices seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere, echoing off the walls and filling their minds with dread. Each whisper carried a different tone, some pleading, some angry, but all filled with a sense of despair. They rattled the doorknob, their hearts pounding in their chests, but it wouldn't budge. It was locked. Desperation set in as they pounded on the door, hoping someone, anyone, would hear their cries for help. The sound of their frantic attempts echoed in the confined space, amplifying their sense of hopelessness. But as they turned to flee, they found the attic door had slammed shut. The force of the slam reverberated through the room, sending a shockwave of fear through their bodies. It was as if the house itself was determined to keep them inside, toying with their emotions and feeding off their terror. Panic surged through them. They had to get out of there. Their breaths came in short, ragged gasps as they looked around for any possible escape route. The walls seemed to close in even more, and the oppressive atmosphere made it hard to think clearly. Every creak and groan of the old house felt like a sinister presence watching their every move. Her pale hand pressed against the tiny glass, her lips moving in a silent plea. The ghostly figure seemed to be trying to communicate with them, her eyes filled with sorrow and desperation. It was as if she was trapped too, a prisoner of the dollhouse, and she was reaching out to them for help. The children watched in terror as the ghostly figure in the dollhouse moved closer to the window. Each step she took seemed to make the air grow colder, and the light from the dollhouse flickered more intensely. They could feel her presence, a chilling reminder that they were not alone in this haunted attic. The realization that they were trapped with a restless spirit made their situation even more dire.
We have to break the dollhouse.
Max shouted, his voice tight with fear. He grabbed a dusty bookend from a nearby shelf and raised it above his head.
No! Don't hurt her!
But Max was beyond reason. He brought the bookend crashing down on the dollhouse, but it bounced harmlessly off its surface. The dollhouse remained intact, its tiny windows glowing brighter than ever. The ghostly girl inside was gone, but the whispers grew louder, angrier. They were running out of time.
We have to burn it! Fire cleanses the spirit and releases it. It's the only way to break the curse and free ourselves from this nightmare.
Emily, her mind racing, remembered something her grandmother used to say about spirits and their attachments to the physical world. Her grandmother's stories always had a way of surfacing at the most critical moments. She recalled the old tales of spirits bound to objects, unable to move on until those objects were destroyed. Jake, his eyes wide with a mixture of fear and hope, grabbed a ragged curtain from a nearby window. He knew they had to act fast. The air was thick with tension, and every second felt like an eternity. The curtain, once a simple household item, now seemed like a lifeline in their desperate bid for freedom.
No spoken line, action described by narrator.
They piled broken furniture and old newspapers around the dollhouse, their hands shaking with terror and adrenaline. Each piece they added felt like a step closer to salvation. The dollhouse, once a symbol of innocence, now stood as the epicenter of their fear. The children worked in a frantic rhythm, driven by a shared sense of urgency. Max, his initial bravado gone, struck a match and tossed it onto the pile. The small flame flickered for a moment before catching onto the dry paper and wood. He watched, his heart pounding as the fire began to grow. The match, a tiny spark, now held the power to change their fate. Flames erupted, engulfing the dollhouse in a fiery embrace. The fire spread rapidly, consuming the wooden structure with a ferocity that mirrored the children's desperation. The heat was intense, and the crackling of the wood filled the room. It was both terrifying and mesmerizing, a dance of destruction that held the promise of liberation. The whispers reached a deafening crescendo, then abruptly stopped. The sudden silence was almost as shocking as the noise had been. It was as if the house itself was holding its breath, waiting to see what would happen next. The children stood frozen, their eyes wide with a mixture of fear and hope. The attic door swung open with a groan, as if released from an evil spell. The sound echoed through the now silent house, a final punctuation to their ordeal. The children exchanged glances, a silent understanding passing between them. They had done it. The curse was broken, and they were free. The oppressive weight that had hung over them lifted, replaced by a sense of relief and triumph. They didn't waste a second. Coughing and choking on the smoke, they stumbled out of the attic and ran as fast as their legs could carry them. They didn't stop running until they were far away from the house, their lungs burning and their hearts pounding in their chests. As they stood there, catching their breath, they looked back at the house on the hill. Smoke billowed from its broken windows, but even from a distance, they could have sworn they saw a faint, ghostly glow emanating from the attic. The old Whitaker House still stands on the hill, a silent sentinel overlooking the town. The fire was extinguished, but the stories about what happened that night spread like wildfire. Some dismissed it as a childish prank gone wrong. Others weren't so sure. As for Max, Emily, Jake and Lily, they never spoke of that night again, but they never forgot the whispers, and they never went near the old Whitaker House ever again. Some doors, they learned, are best left unopened, and some houses, no matter how tempting, are better left unexplored.